everyone, and welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And it's the first of our annual Bloody Scotland podcasts. And this time it is the shortlisted authors for the Bloody Scotland Debut Prize, who include David Goodman. Hello, David.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. Natalie Jayne Clark. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, hello.
Foday Mannah, who we hope will be joining us later. If not, we'll speak to him at another time. Claire Wilson. Hello, Claire.
Hello.
And Richard Strachan. Hi there, Richard.
Hi there.
So we're going to go through each novel so listeners can get a taste of them. Starting with yourself, David, and A Reluctant Spy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can. So, Reluctant Spy is about a young Scotsman called Jamie Tillich who moves down to London to take up a job after having got himself into Cambridge. He's come from a fairly rough background, so he doesn't really have many support networks. And then he gets identified by a secret MI6 program called the Legends program, and he's offered the support that he doesn't otherwise have to get through life, to find jobs and so on. And in return, he has to give his identity over to an agent at some unspecified point in the future. And he takes that sort of devil's bargain. And then when he shows up for his handover, when he gets activated, his handler is indisposed and he ends up on the mission himself. So it's a kind of fish out of water story.
I'm going to ask you all about the kind of inspirations for each story. I can't wait to hear what that one is. But Natalie, yourself, the Malt Whisky Murders.
Yes. Oh, you say it so beautifully, Ali. The Malt Whisky Murders. Ailey is a whiskey blogger, and her and her wife have bought a dilapidated whiskey distillery in Campbelltown, a region that was once the whiskey capital of the whole world. But now its region is sort of contested because there's only a couple left. So they're going to disrupt the male-dominated, industry of Scotch whisky, and also maybe rejuvenate Campbelltown. But dun dun dun, there's two dead bodies in two of the barrels that have been there since the 70s, so 50 years. Sort of kind of cold case kind of thing. Amateur sleuth in Ailey who just kind of can't leave them alone, even though they've agreed to hide them for now because they need to get this distillery up and running. So it's a bit of fun.
I was speaking to someone at the Bloody Scotland programme launch about the premise of your novel, Natalie, and they were wearing it over their head. How did they get the bodies into the barrels? So, well, you have to read it to find out. Claire, your novel, 5 by 5, can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. It's based on my day job as an intelligence analyst in the Scottish Prison Service. It's a position that I've had for a long, long time. And as soon as I understood the concept of the job, which was about 6 months after I was given it, I thought, there's a crime novel here. But it just took me, that was back in 2012 when I started writing it. But it took me a while to understand what the actual plot was and how to execute it. So mine's is a bit different in terms of that. That's what the background of mine is. So
that sounds really interesting as well, to get inspired by your place of work. I think a crime novel says something about the workplace, I think. And Richard, yourself, The Unrecovered. What's that about?
So The Unrecovered it's a historical Gothic mystery. It's set in and around South Queensferry, towards the very end of the First World War. It follows three characters. There's Esther, who's a volunteer nurse at a stately home that's been turned into a hospital for recovering soldiers. There is Jacob, who's recently returned from British India to inherit this sort of dilapidated old sort of Norman castle, essentially, quite near this stately home. And then finally, there's Daniel, he's a patient at the hospital, and he's recently come back from the Palestine front, and he's been wounded in mysterious circumstances. And all these three characters, their stories sort of link up to a local legend which dates back to the time of the Crusades and is somehow linked to this Norman castle.
And I've seen the novel be compared to Hogg and Stevenson. Are those inspirations or references you can recognise?
Yeah, maybe less so Hogg, but Stevenson definitely. There's a sort of scene that takes place in South Queen Street at the Hawes Inn, if anyone knows that particular hotel pub. And that was where Stevenson stayed there. He was inspired while he stayed there to write Kidnapped. So and that it features in Kidnapped as well. And there's some aspects of like doubling and doppelgangers and that kind of thing, which I suppose would tie into to Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. So yeah, I think Stevenson's he's as a perennial influence, I think, in any Scottish literature.
And I think we can see just from those descriptions that there's a real range of styles and content across all of the novels. But let's talk about what inspired them, what inspired each one. Going back to yourself, David, what was the inspiration behind yours?
So I've worked in loads of different jobs over the years. I've been the sort of 20-something Scotsman feeling slightly out of place in London. So that's probably the character inspiration, although I'm at pains to say that I'm not a spy and I never have been, because it always comes up.
You would say that. You would say that.
The more I deny it, the more people are like, okay. But the core idea actually came from an interview that I saw with Edward Snowden when he was talking about the sheer amount of digital data that we leave in the world as we move through it. And he was coming at it from the perspective of how hard it was to hide from governments and how hard it was to, dissent in authoritarian regimes and so on. But when I was listening to that, I was like, how hard would that be to fake if you had to find somebody and kind of make them appear to be real to those digital trawl nets that are always looking for people. And that was where so I wrote this one-liner 10 or 12 years ago in my notebook that just said, real people lend their identities to spies, ? And that sat in my idea file for years and years until I got the chance to write it.
And did you have to research at all? Can you research something like that?
No, and a lot of people have been like, "Is this a real thing?" Like, and I'm like, "Well, I hope not," because it's an idea that's fraught with, potential ways to go wrong, which is what makes for interesting spy novels, but it would probably not work terribly well in reality. Although the CIA actually reviewed it in their internal in-house magazine,
Wow.
the Annals of Intelligence, and they said that it's a very elegant solution. Perhaps we should adopt it. So I was like, okay, I'm not sure that's true, but I think they were slightly tongue-in-cheek when they gave me that review.
Oh, that's one that's got to go on a cover at some point from
100%, yeah. It's already on the website.
You should get royalties if they go with that.
Definitely.
From
I'm not sure how I'd collect them, but I definitely would be out for that.
Yeah. On the other hand, if we never see you again, David, then
yes, yes, I'm completely happy. If I disappear, it's not a good thing.
And Natalie, what's the inspiration for Malt Whisky Murders?
I started drinking whiskey when I was about 19, and like the character Ailey, had a fiver left in my pocket and was waiting for the bus up to uni to write an essay, and thought it'd be better spent in the new whiskey pub that had just opened up instead of going up to uni. So I started drinking whiskey there, and then from there started going to lots of distilleries, and I can't pinpoint exactly which one because I've been to so many now, but in one of them I remember someone sort of in a passing remark in a warehouse saying like, oh, and they ones haven't been opened for 50 years. And I was like, body. And going back to the bodies in the barrel thing, I did research different barrel sizes to think like which one could you fit a grown man into, so with their bodies, bent in half and shoved in, big sherry butt type thing. Could fit. So really that was the germ of the idea there that kind of percolated for a while, and I knew I'd want a woman in whiskey angle as well, partly just because I was 19, 15, 16, about that 15 years ago, quite a while ago now, at that time, it was often just me and maybe one other person that, the women in the rooms and stuff. So it has massively changed in that time, but that was an interesting experience in itself. And so I definitely wanted that angle as well of like looking at what's happening right now, like the Our Whiskey Foundation and the work they're doing in different distilleries that have opened up that are women run, or like there's a lot more like master blenders that are women as well, and things like that. They've like a lot of charge in it. So, and then basically it was just an idea when I pitched to the Bloody Scotland Pitch Perfect with my 100-word idea. And that's really when you know, when I got selected to pitch, that's when I wrote the synopsis and sort of thought, right, well, who did it and why, and all that kind of stuff. So I already had the sort of setting, and I had the protagonist, and I had the body in a barrel, but percolating for a while. And it wasn't until then that I sort of sat down, and then it made sense in my mind to have a second body as well. So yeah.
It's interesting that the whiskey came before the murders side of it.
Yeah, and I think there's often, there's a few settings that are just quite good for murders, and but yeah, I just knew that it was an area that I wanted to explore, and that I found fascinating as an idea. And there's been recent sort of exposés of like, for example, whiskey casks being sold to multiple people, like the same cask being sold to multiple people, or like the cask not even existing, because there's hundreds of them out there. I can't remember. It's like there's like billions or millions of liters currently maturing, so just that idea that just innocently two barrels just hide this secret. Yeah, love that.
Yeah, yeah, I saw a documentary on that as well. It does seem a bit of a Wild West industry still. And Claire, you kind of mentioned a little bit about the inspiration behind your book, but could you expand on that?
Yeah, so as I say, I've worked for the prison service for the last 24 years, and I got promotion into the intelligence management unit in late 2011. And about 6 months later, like, I had to go to Tully Allen Police College. I was trained by the police. I had to do like a 2-year diploma, and after about 6 months, because it's such a complex role, things were happening, and one day I thought, so my job basically is to make the prison a safe environment for staff, prisoners, and visitors. And in order to do that, we need to try and like reduce the violence, stop contraband coming in, like drugs and phones and weapons, and identify and investigate any staff corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, thinking like, what if, intelligence came in about somebody that you liked? Like, what will I do? Like, it's hard. And just that whole like, well, what if it was somebody you were in a relationship with? What would you do? Would you inform on them and get them into trouble, or would you cover for them? And it's a question that like everybody else says, you think about it and it percolates somewhere in the back of your mind. And then with the success of Line of Duty and everybody talking about Line of Duty, I was like, right, if I can try and get it like Line of Duty, then people might be interested in it and stuff, eh? So but it's 40 hours a week of research that I get paid to do. That's the way I look at it these days.
So you're doing your research as part of your everyday job.
Pretty much, yep, pretty
And
much.
just a quick question: what does 5 by 5 mean? What's the title?
So it's funny because everybody assumes it's the dimensions of a prison cell, but it's not. So 5 by 5 is the kind of nickname for an intelligence report, and it's based on the grading system. So if I was to receive intelligence for somebody that I didn't know, or somebody that had submitted intelligence for the first time, they would get like an E4 grading, which means that they're untested and therefore unreliable. But if you were getting information, or if I seen or heard something like with my own eyes, I would grade it A1, which means it absolutely 100% happened. So the grading system goes for A to E and 1 to 5, and it's used by the military, it's used by the police, it's used by I'm guessing the CIA.
Probably, yeah.
It's used by like loads of different kind of organizations, and that's what it is. A 5 by 5 is just the kind of the grading system with an intelligence report. And
You're looking at me like I know, Claire. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a spy.
Listen, you've got some secrets. I'm not believing that you made all this up in your own head. I'm sorry.
I know when I said at the beginning, if you say anything you want taken out, I've never been more sure that this might happen. that might be the case.
Well, the listeners will never know.
Let's go to safer ground in historical fiction. Richard, The Unrecovered. What's the inspiration behind that?
The inspiration really comes out of the landscape for me, because as I said before we started, I live in New Haven, which is it's a very northwest Edinburgh, right by the sea, and I often go walking along the coast between where I am now and South Queensferry, and there's a little spur of land just outside South Queensferry called Hound Point, and I saw it in the Ordnance Survey map, and it seems such a strange, evocative name that I started looking into it. So I did a little bit of research to try and find out where it came from, and it relates back to this legend that goes back to the Crusades, where it's I fictionalize it in my book, but it's in reality it's this place called Barnbougle Castle. And during the sort of 12th century, the lord of that castle, he went off on the Third Crusade. He left his favorite hunting hound behind, and then supposedly the hound howls from that point when he died in battle 2,000 miles away. And so the legend says the heir of Barnbougle Castle, when they're about to die, they'll hear the sort of ghostly howling of this hound. So I sort of fictionalized that, but that was really the basis for it. And I knew you could build something quite sort of mysterious and gothic around that story. And then when I found that Dalmeny House nearby was used as a hospital for soldiers in the First World War, I thought that's the connection. And then I could connect that via the Palestine campaign in the First World War, which is of course going over the same territory, the same ground as the Crusades were. So you had that nice sort of historical linkage. You had like the landscape central to it, and then people sort of finding their own stories woven around those two things.
And I mean, earlier on, I spoke about research. Did this take a lot of research? Did you already have some of this knowledge?
Yeah, I had some of the knowledge. I mean, my sort of academic background is in history and archaeology. So I knew sufficient about the First World War and about the Crusades, just anyway. But yeah, I did. I read a lot of like sort of soldiers' accounts of the campaign in the First World War. I had to look into things like the voluntary aid detachment for nurses, so volunteer nurses in hospitals. Yeah, just things like that. Just making things. I mean, I'd never written historically before, so even things like if a character crosses a room and what does the room really look like? What are they wearing? Just very simple sort of things that you take for granted if you're writing contemporary kind of fiction. Yeah. I had to kind of like think those through sort of every stage. It got more comfortable as I went on, but yeah, that was the kind of research.
I've spoken to a few writers who have been put off writing historical fiction because of things like, did they have curbstones? Did they have sash windows? Those kind of things. And I'm delighted to say now we have been joined by Foday Mannah. Hello, Foday.
I'm so sorry for being late.
It's no problem at all. Better that you're here than not. And your novel, your shortlisted novel, is The Search for Othella Savage.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about that? Can you give us a description of it?
Well, it's crime fiction. To start with, I never really saw myself as a crime writer, but I more or less, when I completed my writing degree, it was a case of responding to specific prompts, and the prompts basically asked for crime fiction. So I had this idea a few years ago. Well, going back a bit, there was this harrowing case of this South African nurse who was abducted from her flats here in Edinburgh and was locked in the boot of a car for about 10 days. So I used that as a foundation to more or less produce a novel that basically focuses around that. However, I've always been quite uncomfortable with the way that crime fiction is classified. In our system, growing up in Sierra Leone, there's a bit of snobbery towards crime fiction. I remember, for example, my first day of university, the lecturer saying to us that crime novels are not novels per se. He described them as crime and sex fiction. And I always found that classification to be, I found that to be quite problematic, because I was of the opinion that more or less genres don't have to be mutually exclusive. In other words, you could, for example, write a crime fiction novel and then intersperse it with other deep themes. So that's what I try to do on the surface. It's more or less looking at this case of women who get abducted, but beneath that, I also try to look at things like religion and power, the use of power.
I think that's really interesting. I think that attitude prevailed for a long time about crime fiction. I do think that has changed, and I think the debut shortlist and actually the McIlvanney Prize long list this year shows exactly the kind of breadth and the cross genres and all of those things. So it was inspired by a real life events then?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Yeah. And were you worried about using a real life event to then fictionalize?
Or slightly. I mean, you always feel, even when the novel was in production towards the end, I think a similar thing happened down in London. I think we had a case whereby, rather unfortunately, this form of violence seems to be quite common. It's always like visited upon women. So almost identical case, Alistair, happened down south. And I remember one of the editors saying, should we maybe remove that from the novel? His view was that perhaps might be a bit problematic in terms of trying to depict things that had actually happened. So yeah, and even to this day, I still feel slightly concerned about looking at these things because it is fiction, it is a book, but it's actually based on somebody's real lived experience that could have been quite traumatic.
That takes us nicely to the challenges of writing a debut novel, which I'd like to hear from all of you. Natalie, let's start with you since you're in the top corner to me. What did you find challenging about writing this debut? Because I know you've written before.
Yeah, well, I come from more of a poetry background. So the beautiful thing about writing poetry is potentially you could think of the idea, write your first draft and edit it like in a single train ride, a novel is not like that. I've always been a big reader. I was a teacher, an English teacher for quite a few years, that kind of thing. I'd started trying to write a novel before the Pitch Perfect thing. So, but was the question is like, what was the challenge?
Yeah, what did you find challenging? Perhaps it was.
I think for me, just that it takes time and it is like chipping away. You have to chip away, and you really have to have that perspective of like every journey starts with a single step, and a finished dress is made up of many panels and stitches and things like that, and it can be really hard to see that. So when you're writing a big book that's tens of thousands of words, and what success looks like on a day, but actually sort of trying to visualize it in my mind, like something like that, like, okay, so today I finished a pocket, or today I, on the dress, or today I like made a buttonhole or something like that, and and trying to sort of visualize it like that. I think things like even word counts can be difficult in terms of tracking. It is helpful to have that tracking, but some days you come in, and I would maybe read the bit that I'd just written and edit that, or I'd add a bit, but sometimes you end up cutting stuff. So then it looks like, if that's the only way you're tracking, it looks like you're, earlier than when you were, but actually you spent, like, there was one kind of recently, writing the book I'm currently writing, and the whole day it looked like I made no progress, but for me, I spent 8 hours thinking and editing, and like I completely, figured some big things out, and then the next day I could start with like, yes, now I understand where this bit's going. So I think for me that's sort of the challenge thing, is sort of turning up and getting it done, no matter how enjoyable I find the research and the imagining, and no matter how much I've got it kind of planned in my mind or written down. I think is just the fact that it takes a while, and you just need to keep going and do little things to encourage yourself.
You have to accept that. Yeah.
Because the writing bit, I enjoy the writing bit, and but I'm used to writing poems or articles. So actually that's the more of the angle I'm trying to take with this one, is like, I'm just going to write a section at a time and write it separately from the big manuscript, so that I'm dealing with smaller chunks. Yeah.
And Dave, yourself, what did you find a challenge or unexpected when writing this?
So it came about in quite a strange way, because I've been writing for years and years and years. I've written multiple novel drafts, but I didn't quite have the courage or the kind of wherewithal to actually send anything out on submission. I just piled up drafts and never edited them. And so when I got to the book that got me representation with my agent, I think I'd learned a lot. I just hadn't kind of tested that. And so that book, I kind of used it to teach myself to edit, got representation with it, but then it died on submission, which is extremely common. People don't really talk about it, but it's very common as a working novelist to just have books just completely die. Nobody buys them. Oh, well, write another one. So I wrote another one. That also didn't sell. And then this book, A Reluctant Spy, was living in my ideas file, and it came about through a conversation with Toby Jones at Headline. He said, "Have you got any other ideas? Because I really like your books, I just can't buy them." So for me, the main challenge was writing a book for a specific editor, which is normally an experience you only get on your second or third or fourth novel. Writing something to spec like that, so I wrote it quite quickly, and there was quite a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, like, this is not the sort of thing I expected to be doing with my first book. But it was pretty hardcore.
And I guess you've just got to keep on believing in yourself, and when you get those knockbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the point where I'd written enough books that I could reasonably be confident of writing, 90,000, 100,000 words. I knew I could do the physical task of actually producing a book like Object, but I was very definitely not confident that I could produce one that was good enough that Toby would buy it, but thankfully I did.
And yourself, Richard, how was it for you writing? I mean, you mentioned you're an academic. I presume you've written in other forms and other styles.
Yeah, I never worked as an academic, but but yeah, I suppose my journey is probably quite similar to David's actually. Like I spent many years not really getting anywhere, like writing a lot of short stories, which would do pretty well. I'd get in shortlists for competitions, I'd get them in journals and magazines and stuff like that. And then I'd write novels, which at the time I was coming from more of a, or I thought I was coming from more of a sort of experimental side of literature. So I wasn't really, um, I wasn't really interested in things like characters and plot and that kind of thing. And none of those books really worked, and I probably knew it. And I wasn't really getting anywhere. And then the sort of the last book that I wrote before the Unrecovered is the one that got me representation with an agent, even though he rejected it. But he wanted to see what else I had, and by that point, I was really trying to turn around what I wanted to achieve with writing a piece. I kind of lost sight of what it was I actually wanted to achieve by writing fiction. I didn't really. It just got to a point where I wanted something to submit, and I hoped it would get published, but I didn't really know what or why. But
Right.
with this, I kind of thought, right, what do I actually want to do? I want to sort of tell an interesting story with characters and plot, which is going to weave in some of the broader thematic things that I'm interested in. It's going to deal with landscape and history and war and psychology and that kind of stuff. Um, so it was the process of trying to sort of winnow down all my expectations, try to deal with all the sort of previous failures that I'd had, and then trying to pour those into a narrative that would hopefully that people would want to read, and that not just editors and publishers would want to read, but readers, people would want to pick up at a bookshop. So I was lucky in that I had an agent while I was writing it, and I think that really gave me an impetus because I knew at least someone in the business was going to read this. It wasn't just going to be another thing I was going to send off into the ether and it would get rejected after like 60 submissions or something. Um, and my agent was extremely helpful, helping me hone that kind of narrative that I wanted. And I guess beyond that, what I also found a challenge was, like I was saying earlier, trying to incorporate some of those historical details of research without making it overbearing, without having like a big exposition dump of information. Yeah, so all those things.
Now, there's a couple of interesting things there, which we may come back to and talk to everyone about. But Claire, yourself, what did you find challenging or surprising about writing your debut?
Well, my background is pretty much like what everybody else is saying. Like I've been trying to get myself an agent and a book deal for a long time, and I would enter all these competitions with the hope that, like, if I got somewhere with them, I would have some sort of portfolio that I could present to an agent, and the hope that it would get me signed at the very least. And the prize was an agent, a publishing deal, in an advance. So that's a bit different. But the most challenging thing for me was once I won that competition, I had to disclose it to my work, because if you're going to bring the executive attention to the prison service, you have to declare it. And when I declared that, there was a bit of a panic when people found out what the book was about, and I had a really nervous couple of weeks,
Right.
wondering whether I was going to get both, and that was really quite challenging. But I'd already signed on my contracts, so it was a really kind of hard couple of weeks until such time somebody read the very first draft, and have supported me more than I anticipated in the last 2 years or so. But it was a really challenging time.
Oh,
I'm grateful.
That sounds like
I'm
a really
grateful that I didn't have to choose.
That sounds like a really unique challenge. And Foday, yourself, what was the challenges? I think you said you did a
So,
writing. Did you do writing at university?
No, I just studied English in university, English language and literature. So I thought I dabbled in nonfiction when I was in university in Sierra Leone. We had a newspaper called The Satellite, but because I grew up in Sierra Leone during a civil war, so a lot of my writing, more or less, it's almost as if the expectation was that's what I had to write on. It had to be about a civil war. And so I decided to do a writing degree, and I applied to the University of Glasgow to do a master's in creative writing, and I didn't get accepted. And I tell people that story all the time. When people talk about rejection, I was like, well, I did not even get accepted to writing school, so much more getting a novel. So once I got turned down by Glasgow, I applied for Falmouth down south. It had to be online, Alistair, because I'm a full-time teacher. There was no way I could leave my job to study full-time. So it had to be a distance learning. So I did it at Falmouth. And as part of my final dissertation, I wrote the opening sections of my Civil War novel. But similar to The Gentleman, similar to what David was saying, it's a case of submitting it to many people and nobody picked it up. Nobody will pick it up. And of course, I crossed paths with Claire because it just so happened that I heard about Bloody Scotland and they have the competition for crime fiction. And I had this kernel of an idea about what I explained further earlier on. So I submitted, I'd written the opening sections of it. And of course, I submitted it. Of course, both Claire and I didn't win. We both lost. But at the same time, I sent it down south to the Most Suturan Prize, which it happened to win. So my journey is very similar to Claire's in the sense that the only reason I'm a published author is the fact that I won a competition. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been. So, I mean, and then COVID happened, of course. And during COVID, I remember like during COVID, doing lots of writing. That's when I tried to submit quite lots of things, but nothing really picked up. But generally, I favored a bit more like short stories. I think, yeah, I wrote much more. I saw them at kind of like mixtapes. Like you hear, for example, rappers say, for example, you have a mixtape. So I saw short stories as quite something that's sustainable or something that you can do. You write a short story, and similar to what I think was what Richard was saying, that I got shortlisted in quite a lot of competition. So it was quite good in terms of providing some kind of validation in terms of, oh, actually, you're quite decent at this, more or less, to push it forward. But in terms of the novel itself, the only reason it got published was because it won a competition. So I actually got the agent after it had been shortlisted for the Most Suturan Prize. And then the agent contacted me and says, are you interested in representation? And the reason I went with her was, even though she turned me down initially when I wrote my Civil War novel, she turned me down, but she gave me a Zoom call, and it was during COVID and everybody was quite depressed. She actually just called me and said, I'm not going to offer you representation, but I can just give you some advice about the industry in general. So I just thought that actually out of loyalty, so I just signed with her, and then it just took up from there.
So I think it's really interesting that all of you have mentioned agents, because in terms of people who maybe are thinking about becoming writers or have an interest, and certainly from a reader's point of view, it's something that's rarely spoken about, but it seems to have been a vital one for all of you. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's you can't really get a manuscript picked up really without one, and even you did, let's say, win a competition or you did get it picked up, you would still need the agent there for the business and contract side of things. They're extremely important for all of that, because this is your intellectual property, so I think there's all that side of it, the legal and the contracts and the admin, but then there's also they fight the corner for you as well in lots of ways and places, and I think the publishing industry, like even like your podcast and things, Ali, where you talk to lots of different like authors and artists and stuff, these kinds of things, I think it's more open now, and like TikTok or whatever, like we know more about the industry, but in some ways, in many ways, there's still lots of unknowns, so having an agent, they're there to sort of support you, I think, but there's so many people that are sending manuscripts that in a way the agent is also there like to support the publishers, because they're there to say, yes, I would recommend this to you, so that the publisher isn't reading millions and millions of things. They are then there's already been like a selection process before it gets to them, kind of thing,
Yeah, there's very few publishers will take any unsolicited manuscript at all. They occasionally have very short windows or they'll run competitions. But if you want to be traditionally published, you kind of need an agent. It's kind of a necessary condition now.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The publishers did used to have the pile of that sent in, and it just doesn't happen anymore, is my understanding. Does anyone else have anything to say about the agent relationship with writers?
No, I think it's exactly what Natalie and David just said. That's exactly it. It's almost as if they are like the gatekeepers, and to gain access, you have to go through them. When I remember being shortlisted for the Bristol Prize in 2019, but then I didn't know anything about agents. And when I went down to Bristol, it's then as soon as you, for example, get shortlisted, agents start to contact you. So it's almost as if they keep an eye on the industry in general, but it's almost as if they actually have to open the door. Otherwise, you cannot get access. So yeah, I think they're vitally important when it comes to publication and just navigating the industry in general. Yeah, they seem to be the people who have their fingers on the pulse, and they seem to dictate how trends work and how things go.
And I think you can also have like a friendship, but it's a business partnership ultimately. But if you have a good relationship with your agent, it can make an enormous difference because it means they're advocating for you. They're making sure you're fully understand everything, as Natalie was saying, that you're being asked to put your signature to, and they can advise on trends, they can advise on all kinds of things. So yeah, my agent is my right hand man when it comes to working in the industry, definitely.
Absolutely.
And another thing I wanted to ask you all about is being on this shortlisted for this debut prize. I mean, congratulations, obviously. What does it mean to each and every one of you? Let's start with you, Claire, down at the bottom.
I mean, there's loads of competitions and crime festivals and stuff, but for me, this feels like a real full circle moment for me. For going to bloody Scotland for years and years and years, to doing Pitch Perfect, to doing Crime in the Spotlight last year, and then to be on the shortlist this year. Like, to be honest, it was all I wanted for this year, was to be on the bloody Scotland shortlist and be just have that recognition and just be rewarded for years and years and years. And it sounds like we've all been in the same boat, like years and years and years of trying to make this happen and no giving up and stuff. And I am absolutely buzzing for September. I cannot wait. We're going to have such a great day, and just to get the Friday over with and enjoy the rest of the weekend. But I'm just so relieved, and to see the long list that was announced the other day there, and just the absolute diverseness on that list, and it makes me all the more excited for it, to be honest. I'm so grateful to the bloody Scotland board and the judges who have put me forward for this. I will forever be grateful for that, and it will probably be the best day in my life so far.
And I think you're right about the long list as well as your own shortlist. It's a phenomenal selection of books across the board. Foday, what does it mean to yourself?
Well, incredibly humbling, just like what Claire said. I mean, I think about my writing degree. I finished in 2015. So it's actually like a whole decade in terms when you think about it, Alyssa. So it is drudgery. It is difficult. It can be quite soul sapping at times. It can be demotivating at times, but it's a validation. And even, I mean, when I found out that I've been shortlisted, I bought all the books. I managed to get signatures of Natalie and Claire when we met on, but I couldn't get David, and I think David and Alan disappeared. But I still got them in September. Yeah, I'll get them in September to sign for me. So I'm incredibly excited about it all. I look at the books and even just reading them and seeing them and thinking it is humbling. I think Scotland, like Claire says, Scotland has this fascinating and such a rich depth of a tradition when it comes to crime fiction. So to be even mentioned within the same festival that some of the greats have basically featured in, it's incredibly humbling. And there's also the element of validation, like Claire said, the fact that you've been trundling along and then something more or less comes up that says, well, actually, somebody has seen your work. Because, I mean, the writing process can be incredibly insular. It's very, very lonely. A lot of the time you exist in your head and you put something out there, and these are novels that are now out there. And so I think, it's quite an experience. And at times you pinch yourself and think, is this really me?
Yeah, and Richard, yourself, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Foday there. It's genuinely humbling. I'm still in the sort of position where I can't believe that someone I don't know has actually read my book. That still seems quite a novelty to me. So um, for any kind of shortlist, whether it's a short story competition or something, with this kind of profile, um, it does feel like it feels like you've been gifted something, to been picked out of, I'm sure like a huge number of other equally deserving books to have been to be put in the shortlist. So yeah, it's really, and for me as well, it's I hope it's something that reflects well on my publisher, because I kind of feel like my editor and my publisher, they took a real punt on something, a completely unknown debut novel. They take a bet on that, and this is like a way of showing to them, well, hopefully this is the right bet that you made. It's getting some kind of recognition. So I feel that side of it is as important as what it means to me.
And do you feel similarly, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing you realize quite quickly when you get into this game is that there's things you can control, which are doing the writing, showing up at the desk every day, sending your books out, but literally everything else is outside of your control, whether you get an agent or not, whether you get a deal or not. And you kind of try quite hard to have goals that you can achieve and dreams that you might achieve, but you just hope they happen. And then when things like this do happen, it's like, well, we're doing the right thing. And for me, Bloody Scotland is this sort of, it's been sort of woven into the story of this book because I finished the first draft of it and sent it to my editor while sitting in the cafe at the Albert Halls in 2023, the year that I saw Natalie at Pitch Perfect. And then I came back the next year and I was doing Crime in the Spotlight with Claire, and we have the same, we don't have the same agent, but we're with the same literary agency, and we met for the first time properly at Bloody Scotland. And it's just kind of feels, and then this year I've been selected for the debut prize, and it's just it feels incredible just the way that the writing community in Scotland is so friendly and welcoming, and the crime writing community as well. And Bloody Scotland just feels like the picture perfect example of that.
I think you're right. I think the crime writing community seems particularly welcoming, not just to other writers, but to readers as well. It's the real kind of camaraderie there.
Well, I will say, like, you can probably tell by the shelves behind me that I'm a big science fiction guy, and I was slightly concerned when I found out my debut novel was going to be a spy novel, because I've loved spy novels for years. I did my dissertation on spy novels at university, but I hadn't made any sort of inroads into the crime writing or thriller community at all. I didn't really know anybody. And I was slightly worried that, well, I've put all this effort and time into making friends in one group, and then I'm going to have to start all over again. But I needn't have worried, because it's just such a welcoming group of people.
Absolutely. And Natalie, yourself, what's your thoughts on making a debut prize list?
Yeah, the debut shortlist. I mean, I'm still, to be honest, like a little bit in disbelief or something that I have like a whole book out. You know what I mean? So that's already, that's a thing in my hand. And then to be shortlisted has been amazing. And yeah, I think validating all those things and echoing what everyone said, but especially about Bloody Scotland and what they do to support new and new voices, and but anyone at any part of their journey. People have mentioned the Crime and Spotlight, which I think is still open at the moment as well to apply for. I think Pitch Perfect is currently open to apply for as well. So they're really trying to do they're doing lots of things that get you heard and seen, and what an amazing like lineup of people that I'm a part of. And just from pitching to a room of people to having an agent and a book deal within the week, and then all the things that Bloody Scotland have done since then as well, so even things like Lynn Anderson, she was the first person to give me my quote, and then Alex Gray on the board, on the with the looking the panel, looking at our books and selecting our books, and everyone else in between, and the podcast as well. I think having podcast episodes where the first chunk is a more established, well-known author, and then having people like us do the last bit at the end is an amazing way to just help everyone, support everyone, and being on the shortlist gives lots of things. But one of the things that gives like opportunities like this, publicity, as well. You know, that you know, adds a little something extra to the press release, doesn't it, when you're out and about. And it just helps. And I think as well, you know, I've been banging on about everyone else's books, you know, and especially Waterstones, the other ones that are like mine, you know, buy one get one half price. I'm like, oh, you might as well get that one as well. You know, and it's just lovely to be a part of a crowd, and to see as well for the Macrovani this year, lots of them have been supported by Bloody Scotland. So Bloody Scotland does a lot for crime fiction in Scotland, and you know, I think we've talked about it before that, like, you know, tartan noir or crime, you know, is one of Scotland's best exports, you know.
And it's really heartwarming to see, like previous debut prize shortlists, the kind of camaraderie between you all and the support, and that it kind of exemplifies just what Natalie has said there. Well, listen, thank you very much, one and all. I'm really looking forward to Bloody Scotland, but I'm guessing not as much as you guys are. David, Natalie, Foday, Claire, and Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And we'll be
you.
back soon with someone completely different.